The Celtics decided to fold their arms at the trade deadline and trust the roster they already have. But was this the right decision? Or was it a colossal mistake that could cost them dearly in the playoffs? The front office seems to be playing a dangerous game of Russian roulette with the fate of the season. Betting on stability could be a sign of confidence, but it could also be an act of stubbornness disguised as strategy. The Celtics' leadership seems to have fallen into the illusion that a championship team can simply keep its core intact and repeat the feat. But what if this is a brutal miscalculation? The team is still great, but it no longer has the same intimidating presence it once did. The Cleveland Cavaliers, Knicks, and even the Pacers have grown and are ready to face off. Regular season basketball is one thing, but the playoffs are a completely different universe, where tactical adjustments and depth make all the difference. Boston has an incredibly strong starting five, but what happens when fatigue sets in and when opponents study the team's weaknesses in depth and exploit every flaw? The lack of movement at the trade deadline could be costly at the most decisive moment of the season. Stevens and Mazzulla are assuming that the roster will solve the problems on its own. But what if they're wrong? What if Porzingis' defensive limitations are exposed in the paint? What if Jrue Holiday isn't as impactful as last year? What happens if Tatum and Brown have bad nights in the playoffs? Will the team have the stamina to hold the fort, or will it collapse under the pressure? Are the Celtics still title contenders? Yes, but they could have ensured a roster more prepared to face the challenges of the postseason. The mistake was believing that what's worked so far will continue to work when the games get tougher. When June arrives, this decision to stand still may be remembered as a catastrophic error or as a stroke of genius. But right now, it seems like an unnecessary risk. Celtics sent the wrong message to the league. The Celtics' inertia could have a devastating psychological effect, while other teams like the Lakers and the Mavs made major moves to bolster their rotations. Boston practically told the rest of the league, "We're fine as we are." But is this message one of confidence or pure stubbornness? Worse still, what if it's interpreted as fear of making the wrong moves? High-level basketball doesn't forgive stagnation. Every team needs to evolve constantly, and the lack of movement at the trade deadline gives the impression that the Celtics front office believes the roster has already reached its ceiling. But is that really true? Can nothing else be improved? This mentality could prove very costly when the playoffs arrive and the team faces opponents who have made the right adjustments to become even more dangerous. Other contenders have reinforced their teams. The Milwaukee Bucks, despite internal issues, have Giannis and Lillard, a duo capable of turning any series around. The Knicks not only strengthened their front court, but they are also playing a very efficient, team-oriented brand of basketball. The Miami Heat may have an irregular season record, but they should never be counted out in the playoffs, where Spoelstra and Butler always find ways to surprise. And the Lakers, who already had LeBron and Davis, now add Luka Doncic to the mix. Meanwhile, the Celtics trusted what they already have. But is this roster really enough to handle the postseason challenges? The regular season only tells part of the story. In the playoffs, when the game becomes more physical and opposing, coaches spend nights figuring out ways to exploit weaknesses. Teams that refuse to evolve are usually the first to fall. Boston may have the best team on paper, but that means nothing if the right adjustments aren't made at the right time. And what did the Celtics do? Nothing. No trades, no strategic reinforcements, no protection against potential team collapses when things get tight. What happens if Kristaps Porzingis starts to break down physically in the playoffs, as has happened before? What if Jrue Holiday isn't as impactful against more dynamic offenses? What to do if Tatum and Brown have bad nights against well-coached defenses, as we've seen in past postseason editions? And the second unit, can Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, and Al Horford sustain a playoff rotation against deeper teams? The Celtics seem to be betting on continuity and team chemistry, but they completely ignored the unpredictability factor of the playoffs. Basketball is a game of adjustments, and the lack of reinforcements could be a fatal mistake when opponents find ways to neutralize the team's strengths. If the Celtics don't win the title, this decision not to make a move at the trade deadline will be seen as one of the biggest strategic blunders of the season. If they make it to the finals and lose again, the narrative will be even worse. They had the chance to improve and chose to do nothing. If the Celtics don't win the title, this will be the reason. If the Celtics fall in the playoffs, the explanation will be clear: the lack of depth and the absence of reinforcements. The starting five is elite. No one can argue with that. But playoffs aren't just about the starting five. A long series against physical teams like the Bucks, Knicks, or even a determined Heat team could expose the weaknesses that Boston ignored. The wear and tear of an entire season could take its toll, and what happens if the key players can't maintain the pace? The Celtics management made the decision to not make any moves at the trade deadline, as if the current roster was flawless. But is it really? If Kristaps Porzingis struggles with injuries, something that has already happened multiple times in his career, who steps in to protect the paint? If Jrue Holiday can't maintain his high level of defense and offense against younger, more explosive guards, what's the plan B? If Al Horford feels the weight of age and can't be relied upon in crucial minutes, who takes on that responsibility? The answer? No one, because the Celtics decided to fold their arms and pretend that nothing needed to be done. Boston needed a reliable backup for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Not a bench warmer, but someone capable of holding down the fort when one of them needs rest or gets into foul trouble. And what did they do? Nothing. They needed a reinforcement for interior defense. If Porzingis or Horford aren't on the floor, the team loses a lot in rim protection. They could have pursued a solid center, someone to bring at least a minimum of defensive security when the starters rest. And what did they do? Nothing. They needed more depth on the bench. Playoffs aren't just about the starters shining. It's about the bench players holding the fort when the rotation tightens. Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, and Luke Cornett might have good moments in the regular season, but does anyone actually believe they can be trusted pieces in a game 6 or 7 against a roster filled with offensive weapons? And what did they do? Nothing. Boston didn't need a big name, a star, or a complete overhaul of the roster. They needed small adjustments, targeted reinforcements to avoid exactly the problems that are likely to appear in the playoffs. But instead of preparing, they decided to go all in on what they already had, ignoring that basketball is a game of adjustments, and other contenders bolstered their rosters to become even more dangerous. If the Celtics win the championship again, Brad Stevens will be seen as a visionary, a genius who trusted his roster without succumbing to market panic. But if Boston fails, this trade deadline will be remembered as the moment when the Celtics chose not to strengthen themselves and paid the price for it. History will be harsh if this team doesn't lift the trophy, because if they don't win the championship, the script is already written. The wear and tear of the season, players feeling the weight of age, and the second unit being incapable of handling the pressure when needed. And all of this could have been avoided with just 1 or 2 strategic moves. The roster is old, and the Celtics refuse to see it. The Celtics' biggest mistake at the trade deadline might not have been just the lack of reinforcements, but rather the insistence on a roster that's already showing signs of wear and tear. The management seems to believe that experience and chemistry are enough to win, but does this roster have the stamina to survive the playoff marathon? Al Horford is 38 years old, and although he still has solid moments, he cannot be asked to perform the same way as before. Jrue Holiday is 34, and while his defense is still a standout, age is starting to weigh on him, especially for a guard who relies so much on his physicality. Even Kristaps Porzingis, who is still in his physical prime, carries a history of injuries that cannot be ignored. It's undeniable that the Celtics have one of the best starting fives in the league, but blindly trusting that this roster can face younger, more athletic teams without any reinforcements is a gross mistake. Playoff basketball is different. In the regular season, it's possible to manage minutes, rest veterans, and hide some weaknesses. But when the games matter most, every possession counts, and the intensity is at its peak. Will Boston have the energy to face opponents who are constantly running and attacking at full force? Boston seems trapped in a false sense of security. While wins continue to pile up in the regular season, management believes that the roster can simply replicate that success in the playoffs. But Does this logic hold up? The Cleveland Cavaliers have an explosive team, with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell leading an aggressive offense, and a young, dominant front court with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. The New York Knicks, who've already made things difficult for the Celtics in regular season matchups, have a physical team, a deep bench, and now an even stronger front court. The Milwaukee Bucks may not be in their best form, but they have Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard, two players who can tear apart any aging defense when they find a weakness. And what happens if Drew Holiday gets tired of guarding the opposing team's top players night after night? If Horford can't keep up with the physical pace of an intense playoff? If Porzingis, as we've seen before, gets exposed defensively in switch situations and starts struggling in the paint? The answer? The Celtics have no plan B. The mistake wasn't just trusting the current roster, but not adding youth and energy to the bench to support a team that is, indeed, aging. The Celtics urgently needed more young, athletic pieces to give the veterans some rest without compromising the level of play. But instead of seeking reinforcements, they chose to keep the rotation tight and trust that the same players will carry the team all the way through. Peyton Pritchard and Sam Hauser are useful, but neither can carry the team in clutch moments. Luke Cornett, as hardworking as he is not a reliable solution to cover for Porzingis and Horford when the paint needs to hold up against physical opponents. While other contenders bolstered their rosters and brought in new pieces to tackle the challenges of the playoffs, the Celtics chose to turn a blind eye to a problem that's about to explode. Time doesn't stop, and older players inevitably lose efficiency when the demands are at their highest. Should Boston have considered trading Jaylen Brown? The biggest taboo in Boston is questioning the partnership between Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. For many fans and analysts, the duo represents the identity of the franchise, a carefully developed project over the years. Since entering the league, they have grown together, collected conference finals appearances, reached an NBA Finals, and finally won a championship. But is that enough to justify keeping them together at all costs? Are Tatum and Brown truly the best way to maximize the Celtics' potential? This is an uncomfortable question, but one that needs to be asked. Do Tatum and Brown really elevate each other's game, or do they just coexist? Both are elite wings, versatile and athletic, but there's a clear issue. They play very similarly and need the ball to be most impactful. Neither is a natural playmaker, which creates offensive struggles when the game tightens up. In clutch moments, the ball is inevitably in Tatum's hands, while Brown takes a secondary role, despite having the talent to be a primary option. Does that make sense? Or is their fit not as ideal as it seems? If this partnership were perfect, Boston would have won more than one title in recent years. The NBA is a league where fit matters as much as raw talent. Teams that fail to adjust their pieces end up stagnating, and the Celtics may be falling into that trap without realizing it. In recent years, we've seen dynamic duos broken up to take franchises in new directions. Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry. And what happened? In some cases, the breakup was painful, but necessary to elevate the teams to a higher level. Are the Celtics making a mistake by holding on to Brown out of loyalty, instead of considering what's truly best for the team? If Boston had been aggressive, they could have pursued Luka Doncic. Dallas has faced uncertainty about how to build around Doncic. If the Celtics had offered Brown in a well-structured deal, would a trade have made sense? Kevin Durant. When KD requested a trade from Brooklyn, Boston could have been more serious about making a move. A Tatum-Durant duo could have been the most unstoppable pairing in the NBA. Trae Young. Atlanta might be open to moving their star, and a playmaking point guard like Trae could solve the Celtics' biggest issue, the lack of a natural playmaker to share responsibilities with Tatum. Hey, Celtics fanatics, what do you think of this news? Leave your opinion in the comments, as it's highly valued.